Why would there be a campaign to shut down this place? Which, by the way, will be unsuccessful. Well, because the people who don't like GB News don't want you to have a voice. They want to stitch up the national conversation and bend the British people to their political will. But the assault on GB News, with a concerted effort to starve this channel of advertising funding, as well as endless bitching in the press, is part of a wider threat to free speech in this country and across the world. The privileged elites who dominate the media, politics and our public institutions, whose woke progressive ideas are supported by 10 to 15% of the population max, they hate social media for the same reason that they hate GB News, because it empowers the people. There are no gatekeepers on social media, no one withholding information, no editorializing, no censorship, no cancellation. The main argument for controlling social media is to stop the spread of misinformation. But who decides what that is? For example, it was misinformation to speculate during COVID that the virus had come from a lab leak. Now it's the most likely explanation, according to US government body, the CIA. Facebook chief Mark Zuckerberg has effectively apologized for allowing the US government under Joe Biden to censor his platform during the pandemic when leading medics and scientists were silenced for criticizing lockdowns, masks and vaccine tyranny. It's my view that they were right all along. We've got police officers here in the UK visiting people at home to quiz them about an unkind social media post, whilst burglaries and violent crime go unpunished. There are fears that at some point it could be illegal to misgender someone. That means you could go to jail for describing a man who thinks he's a woman as a man. So you would go to prison for saying something which is actually the case. Welcome to hell. History tells us that those who censor are never the good guys, which takes me to Brazil, where the Supreme Court, with the full support of the country's socialist government, have banned free speech social media platform X altogether, potentially due to misinformation concerns. Or is it down to ex-owner Elon Musk's refusal to cancel the accounts of those who are critical of the Brazilian government? Even former Prime Minister Tony Blair wants to see measures to control social media. He's worried about the lies being spread online, even though he and Alistair Campbell were the kings of misinformation during the Iraq War. Make it make sense. There is now a concerted effort to silence and shut down debate, particularly around pressing issues which affect ordinary people. Mass migration, net zero, which has become a religious cult that can't be challenged, that can't be criticised. The anti-science madness of trans ideology and the absurd demonisation of the West. None of these things stand up to any real scrutiny. But it is the scrutiny that the Negroni-quaffing North London liberal elite want to end. For example, BBC lifer Jonathan Dimbleby became a figure of ridicule this week with the following tweet. Here's what he tweeted. "I post infrequently," he says, "and this is my last. Elon Musk's toy has been colonised by narcissists, the brain dead and advertisements. I shall nonetheless miss the wit and wisdom of the best among whom I have friends. The latter I shall still see. To the rest, goodbye. Life is too short." What a plonker. First of all, he calls other people narcissists. But he's the one declaring to the world that he won't be sending any tweets anymore. That's a bit narcissistic in itself, isn't it? It's not an airport lounge. You don't have to announce your departure. This apparently legendary broadcaster rails against narcissists after using this platform over the last couple of months to retweet praise about his own book. How about this? "Thanks to the wonderful Dominic Sandbrook for such a brilliant review for my latest book, Endgame 1944. Well, it's the end game for these out-of-touch numpty dinosaurs from another era. Former stars of an establishment media which is dying by the day. Why? Because it's no longer trusted. Look at the BBC, all over the papers today, standing accused of bias against Israel in their reporting of the war in Gaza on 1,500 occasions. What would BBC Verify, their creepy disinformation watchdog, have to say about that, I wonder? Here's what I think. People don't need to be protected from information or misinformation. We've all got a brain. We've got common sense. Allow the public to have access to everything and make their own mind up. The pandemic, if I'm honest, was a watershed for me, when enormous amounts of unscientific nonsense was spouted by the government and senior medics to sell, in my view, failed policies which have left us with a deeply damaged and diminished country. So forgive me for not blindly trusting the ruling elite and their messages. Forgive me for having questions or objecting to tyranny, like I did when I chopped up a mask on talk radio in 2021. Aged pretty well, that one. Free speech is just that. It is free. And if we allow the privileged elite to take it away from us, we will pay a very high price. Your reaction, gbnews.com/your say. Look, it's all about opinions. Government experts, ministers, top scientists would argue that masking, vaccines and lockdowns saved countless lives. That's not my view, but that could be the view of many. Let me know your thoughts. But first, my top pundits this evening. We have former MEP Annunziata Rees-Mogg, journalist and broadcaster Michael Crick, and former Conservative MP and now farmer Neil Parish. Neil, let me start with you. Are you worried about the state of free speech in this country?
Yeah, I think we need to protect it, and I think you need to be able to debate everything, whether it's on the right or whether it's on the left. I mean, a lot of these sort of further right parties in Europe have come about because the fact that all their parties and all their governments are very sort of politically correct and very middle ground. We've got to debate it properly. GB News, I mean, we're here tonight on GB News, so we're bound to say it's a great channel, but seriously, it does debate everything. It debates it properly. And if you've got right-wing views and you want to expound them, do so. And I think this is the problem now. Is it about, protecting people, or is it about actually not giving them the facts? And I think that is the problem. And I think, who is it that's going to censor it all? And that's where it's very, very dangerous. Now, I know sometimes social media can be terribly offensive, and I think that needs to be taken down. But to be able to debate the political position on either side, right or left, on the Israeli side or on the Palestinian side, let's be able to do it, and let's be honest with ourselves. And I think all the time we are being censored. Lots of stuff's been taken out of our books and all sorts of things. My wife's a teacher, but she gets terribly worked up about how all our books are being censored, or what our children have now is completely different to what we grew up with, and everything is changing. But who is deciding this? This is the problem. Okay. And in a democracy, we should be able to debate right, left, centre, whatever we want to debate.
Well, Michael Crick, is there a different way of looking at this? Are concerns about free speech just a right-wing conspiracy?
No, I regard myself as sort of a little bit on the centrist to the left. And I'm very concerned about free speech and upholding it and freedom of expression. And my view is that we should think, if we're going to regulate social media more than it is regulated now, we have to think very carefully indeed that we don't go too far. I mean, for instance, if you're going to regulate because and say you cannot put out misinformation, as you said in your monologue, Mark, who is to decide what is misinformation? There are plenty of laws that apply to the media already in terms of inciting racial hatred, inciting violence, that kind of thing. And the same laws can be applied to social media. Now, there probably are gaps that need filling there, but I just think we have to think, not rush into this. We have to think very carefully indeed. And, of course, the real problem is that social media is not, confined. It's not like a newspaper which is published in one country or a television station that is broadcast from one country. It's much more multinational, so it's harder to regulate in a way. But my overall view is be very cautious, and that freedom of expression, freedom of speech is something that we have developed as civilization, but in the West, the liberal West certainly, over the years, and we should constantly be on our guard to preserve it.
Although Annunciata, critics might argue that platforms like GB News or X, for example, or Facebook, that they lend a voice to people who are divisive or even dangerous, bad for democracy, extremists, liars and cranks.
I actually think that's very healthy. That if you don't have the ability to argue back against extremists, against misinformation, then people start to believe it. And the more you sweep it under the carpet, the more it gets a following that cannot be debated, because only those who've already sort of started to believe in it are even hearing it in the first place, because it's hidden from public view. With light and air, we can all, in our own ways, challenge the falsehoods that do come about in any exchange, in any platform. And we've seen falsehoods in mainstream media. Just because there are rules in place does not mean that things don't slip through. But we can argue against them. We can point out where things are factually incorrect or morally wrong, and we can argue against that. And I think that is why true freedom of speech is so important. We already have laws protecting against inciting violence, causing damage, all of those things. We do not need to restrict it further, and in fact it's worth dying in a ditch for, to protect it for all our futures.
OK, I think you'll agree, a very high calibre panel tonight. They're coming in hot.